All right, welcome back. We're going to wrap up section 2 of chapter 14 today. Should be even shorter than yesterday's. So, we talked yesterday about how Stalin was able to take more centralized power than any other ruler in history, and he's going to completely remake Russia into what he thinks it should be, and he's going to have the power to do that. And it's going to be very different from what Lenin and Trotsky envisioned, very, very different from what the Tsar envisioned. It's going to be really his own vision for the biggest country in the world. And after politically gaining control, which we talked about yesterday with the Great Purges, he's going to take command of the economy. And so there's going to be a new economic system. Remember, under Lenin, they went back to small scale capitalism with the new economic policy. Well, Stalin wants to go full state control, full worker distribution, full essentially communism. And that's called a command economy. In a command economy, the government commands what the people produce and they produce it. Okay, we live in a market or consumer driven economy where we decide what we want to buy, what jobs we want, what wages we'll work for. All of that, as much as possible, that decision is made by the individual. In a command economy, the government decides what will be produced, how it will be produced, who will get it, how much it will cost, who will produce it. Okay, they decide all of that. And so the Soviet realism version of it looks like this, with Captain Stalin at command of the helm of the Soviet economic ship. And you see here, I told you that USSR in Cyrillic is CCCP. All right. And so Stalin is running the economy. And he's going to come up with a series of 5-year plans that he's going to call the 5-year plans. Always creative, these communists. And so essentially, he's going to say Russia has 5 years to achieve X, Y, and Z. We're going to make this much more steel, have this many more miles of railroad. We're going to have this much more electrical power. And he's going to force it to happen. And so the 5-year plan does things like the sort of most famous example is this steel plant at Magnitogorsk. Stalin built a city in the middle of nowhere almost overnight, kind of like Temecula. And put in the factories gradually. He built housing for the workers to live in. Before the housing was completed, they built the factory first and then did the housing. So for the first few years, the workers were living in tents and things and really terrible conditions. But gradually, you get these huge apartment blocks that are built to house the workers. Right? And the result of that is there is a large growth. In 5 years, Russia's electrical output increases hugely. Its steel output, its military, its amount of heavy machinery, it all increases. But the way Stalin made it increase was he forced the Russian worker essentially to just work harder. No other outside countries would invest, okay? And he doesn't have what you're going to learn in 12th grade is called additional capital. So he just forces the people to work harder until the economy is advanced. And so really it's the average Russian worker that makes this happen. And so after 5 years, he declares it a success and decides, well, we're going to do another 5-year plan. And that's called the second 5-year plan. But we won't talk so much about that till we get to a little bit later on in the Cold War and stuff. So he decides he also wants to do that with farming, with agriculture. Now, keep in mind, Stalin doesn't really like farmers because, as some of you, this is Valley Center. Some of you might be farmers or you know farmers. Farmers tend to be independent thinkers and they want to do their own thing and they don't, like most of you, like to be told what to do. So Stalin wants to get rid of that. He wants to get rid of the farmers, especially the land-owning farmers known as the kulaks. And he decides that he's going to turn the farms into factories. And so starting in 1928, he creates collectivized farms. Okay, and these are large farms. The government takes over farmers' land all across the country. And then what they will do is they will take a whole village worth of farmers and take them out of their village and send them to places far away where they don't know anybody and have no connections so that they won't develop any political power. And so the peasants are all relocated to these different collective farms. Now, hopefully you recognize this as Soviet propaganda, right, of all the peasants working together happily to create food. Stalin needs this food not to feed his people, but he needs it to sell to pay for the industrial part of the 5-year plans. So he wants to raise a bunch of grain, sell the grain, and then buy materials to create more factories, things like that. But there's a problem. When you force people to do things, they don't work that hard. Shocking. And so the peasants are taken off their land and put on collective farms. And guess what? Food production drops majorly throughout the Soviet Union because the people don't work so hard when they're not allowed to keep the benefits of what they do. And so the food production drops, but what Stalin does is he takes care of a couple of problems at once. The food that they do produce, he takes from them and sells overseas to make actual hard cash to finance the 5-year plans. And then he starves the peasants. And really what Stalin wants is less peasants, because he sees a vision of an industrialized countryside that needs more machines, less peasants. And peasants really didn't figure into Marx's whole vision for a communist utopia. So he doesn't want as many peasants. And so far from this ideal reality, okay, he's going to crack down on the peasants, and there's going to be 5 to 10 million. Okay, and this is just in the 20s and early 30s. He's going to starve to death 5 to 10 million of his own people. All right, and headlines like this start to appear in the West. Okay, and we get a massive amount of starvation and death, especially in places like the Ukraine, which is independent from Russia now, but is still being attacked by Russia. So far, basically Stalin gets more cash, less farmers, and for him it's a win-win. But about 10 million people have to die from starvation. By 1938, we are at the end of the second 5-year plan, and agricultural production is finally recovering, is finally rising. People have accepted this new lifestyle of farming, and the starvation ends just in time for the Second World War. Okay, so daily life under Stalin. All right. Like what I said with the original Bolsheviks, like Lenin and Trotsky, the people do become more educated. Okay, and that's key for a totalitarian regime is education. They want you in school because they want to train you, not just for whatever job they determine you should have, but also to train you that this is the best way to do things, that the Communist Party is great, best thing to happen to Russia, Stalin cares about you, and there may be sacrifices, but they're worth it to make this communist dream come true. Okay, so there is better schooling. There's more advanced training for people who want it because Stalin wants to modernize Russia. Of course, personal freedom is greatly limited, and there really aren't many consumer goods. There are stores for Communist Party members that have a lot of stuff, but the stores for the average people, there's not very much on the shelves. And we'll talk more about that when we get to the Cold War after World War II. Another thing that started under the Bolsheviks and continues under Stalin is this is really the first place where women become fully equal to men. All right, and the communists say both sexes are equal, something that we're working on over here. And in fact, the women are forced to go to work, and you've probably figured this out, because they want the women at work so that the children from the very youngest age are being raised by the state in public education and daycare. And so women go to work, children go to state schools from as soon as they can remember to be indoctrinated with what the Soviets want. But there really is no gender discrimination in a lot of ways. Many women get advanced educations, they become professionals, they become managers, much more advanced jobs. There are many Soviet doctors who are women, and this is at a time when in the West, many U.S. colleges wouldn't even allow women in. Okay, and if you were a woman and you wanted to get an education, people kind of looked at you kind of weird. You were expected to get married and start a family. What the Soviet Union wants you to do is not get married, but start a family and let the state raise the kids and you go back to work. The military is also opened up to women, and we have, by World War II, we have, this is a little bit after World War II, this picture, but you have women who are colonels and generals and very high up, and there's women in frontline combat, something that we're still kind of hesitant on these days. So women do get full equality, but generally full equality in a society that makes them suffer and work extremely hard. But they still have the same stresses that women today do with work and family, etc. But by the end of the 30s, Stalin has achieved the most powerful state we've ever seen. And he's basically made an industrial, totalitarian political regime where everyone's actions are monitored. He is in complete control. Remember, we talked about not only is it enough not to cause trouble, you have to prove that you're actively supporting everything Stalin wants to do. Just 1 second. Yeah. Sorry for that. So, by this time, Stalin and his agents control all aspects of Soviet life. Okay, education, your sports team, even your opportunities for dating and meeting other people, they're involved in. And he's unopposed as the leader of the Communist Party because of the Great Purges that we talked about in the first section of these notes. Anybody who could potentially have stood against him has been eliminated. All right, and we get this image that Stalin tries to cultivate, and we'll see Hitler tries to do this too, of Stalin as the father to all Russians. Children love him, and I know you've seen images of Kim Jong-un getting flowers from children. Totalitarian dictators love getting flowers from children. It's one of their favorite things to do. And we'll see this with Hitler as well. Although, ironically, Hitler really did like children. He got along well with children. Stalin, as you can tell, not very comfortable with little kids. And Hitler also really likes animals. But we'll get to all that next week. So, he is in complete control of everything. He rules by terror, and the key aspects of terror we've already talked about. He's got a secret police. He's got people to inform on everybody. As technology improves, there'll be more and more surveillance. Most of those, the government built all those apartments. Guess what? There's microphones in all those apartments, so your conversations are all bugged. You are monitored pretty much around the clock. So people don't speak anything that, they don't voice any criticisms, any concerns, because they never know who's listening. But running the police state and having a very harsh policy serves those 5-year plans and industrialization, because a lot of the industrial labor is not paid, but forced labor. This is the White Sea Canal, and this is workers or people would be arrested and sent into work camps to do work on things like the White Sea Canal, where they manually dig a canal connecting the White Sea with an inland river, which the name escapes me. But they built this canal as prison slave labor, and then when the project was done, because all of the people that had built the canal were prisoners, while they're still completing the canal, they open the dam and wash all the prisoners out to sea. So the canal is complete and the prisoners have been dealt with. So there's a tremendous human cost to modernizing Russia. Millions of lives lost. But he also does a pretty good job of keeping that secret from the rest of the world. But we're going to enter now a state where obedience, conformity are demanded, and he will have essentially taken control of the entire Russian Empire just in time for the outbreak of World War II. So that's where we're going to leave it there, and enjoy learning more about Stalin. He's an interesting guy. And remember, he believes in the power of the will. Okay? His will to make you do things.